Okay, we are now on chapter 4, The Placebo Effect in the Body. On a crisp September day in 1981, a group of 8 men in their 70s and 80s climbed into a few vans headed 2 hours north of Boston to a monastery in Peterborough, New Hampshire. The men were about to take part in a 5-day retreat where they were asked to pretend that they were young again, or at least 22 years younger than they were at the time. The retreat was organized by a team of researchers headed by Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer, PhD, who would take another group of 8 elderly men to the same place the following week. The men in the second group, the control group, were asked to actively reminisce about being 22 years younger, but not to pretend that they weren't their current age. When the first group of men arrived at the monastery, they found themselves surrounded by all sorts of environmental cues to help them recreate an earlier age. They flipped through old issues of Life in the Saturday Evening Post, they watched movies and television shows popular in 1959, and they listened to recordings of Perry Como and Nat King Cole on the radio. They also talked about current events such as Fidel Castro's rise to power in Cuba, Russian Premier Nikita Khrushchev's visit to the United States, and even the feats of baseball star Mickey Mantle and boxing great Floyd Patterson. All of these elements were cleverly designed to help the men imagine that they were really 22 years younger. After each 5-day retreat, the researchers took several measurements and compared them to those they'd taken before the start of the study. The bodies of the men from both groups were physiologically younger, structurally as well as functionally, although those in the first group, who pretended they were younger, improved significantly more than the control group, who merely reminisced. The researchers discovered improvements in height, weight, and gait. The men grew taller as their posture straightened and their joints became more flexible, and their fingers lengthened as their arthritis diminished. Their eyesight and hearing got better, their grip strength improved, their memory sharpened, and they scored better on tests of mental cognition, with the first group improving their score by 63% compared to 44% for the control group. The men literally became younger in those 5 days, right in front of the researchers' eyes. Langer reported, "At the end of the study, I was playing football, touch, but still football, with these men, some of whom gave up their canes." How did that happen? Clearly, the men were able to turn on the circuits in their brains that reminded them of who they had been 22 years ago, and then their body chemistry somehow magically responded. They didn't just feel younger, they physically became younger, as evidenced by measurement after measurement. The change wasn't just in their minds, it was in their bodies. But what happened in their bodies to produce such striking physical transformations? What could be responsible for all of these measurable changes in physical structure and function? The answer is their genes, which aren't as immutable as you might think. So let's take some time to look at what exactly genes are and how they operate. Demystifying DNA. Imagine a ladder or a zipper twisted into a spiral, and you'll have a pretty good picture of what deoxyribonucleic acid, better known as DNA, looks like. Stored in the nucleus of every living cell in our bodies, DNA contains the raw information or instructions that make us who and what we are. Although, as we'll soon see, those instructions are not an unchangeable blueprint that our cells must follow for our entire lives. Each half of that DNA zipper contains corresponding nucleic acids that, together, are called base pairs, numbering about 3 billion per cell. Groups of long sequences of these nucleic acids are called genes. Genes are unique little structures. If you were to take the DNA out of the nucleus of just one cell in your body and stretch it out from end to end, it would be 6 feet long. If you took all the DNA out of your entire body and stretched it out from end to end, it would go to the sun and back 150 times. But if you took all the DNA out of the almost 7 billion people on the planet and scrunched it together, it would fit in a space as small as a grain of rice. Our DNA uses the instructions imprinted within its individual sequences to produce proteins. The word protein is derived from the Greek protos, meaning of primary importance. Proteins are the raw materials our bodies use to construct not only coherent three-dimensional structures, our physical anatomy, but also the intricate functions and complex interactions that make up our physiology. Our bodies are, in fact, protein-producing machines. Muscle cells make actin and myosin. Skin cells make collagen and elastin. Immune cells make antibodies. Thyroid cells make thyroxine. Certain eye cells make keratin. Bone marrow cells make hemoglobin. And pancreatic cells make enzymes like protease, lipase, and amylase. All of these elements that these cells manufacture are proteins. Proteins control our immune system, digest our food, heal our wounds, catalyze chemical reactions, support the structural integrity of our bodies, provide elegant molecules to communicate between cells, and much more. In short, proteins are the expression of life and the health of our bodies. For the 60 years since James Watson, PhD, and Francis Crick, PhD, discovered the double helix of DNA, what Watson proclaimed in a 1970 issue of Nature as the central dogma that one's genes determine all, has held fast. As contradictory evidence popped up here and there, researchers tended to dismiss it as a mere anomaly within a complex system. Some 40-odd years later, the genetic determinism concept still reigns in the general public's mind. That means people still think that genes determine everything. Most people believe the common misconception that our genetic destiny is predetermined and that if we have inherited the genes for certain cancers, heart disease, diabetes, or any number of other conditions, we have no more control over that than we do our eye color or the shapes of our noses. The news media reinforce this by repeatedly suggesting that specific genes cause this condition or that disease. They've programmed us into believing that we're victims of our biology and that our genes have the ultimate power over our health, our well-being, and our personalities. And even that our genes dictate our human affairs, determine our interpersonal relationships, and forecast our future. So they turn you into a victim. They make you powerless. They are literally programming and propagandizing you with false information to make you, and acting like an expert to, imbue in you that you are powerless, that everything's predetermined, you can't help it, it is the way it is, there's nothing you can do about it, you just got to make the best out of what you got. It's all a lie. It's all to control you. It's all to manipulate you. It's all to take advantage of you. It's all to use you. It's all to keep you on the consumption wheel. But are we who we are? And do we do what we do because we're born that way? This concept implies that genetic determinism is deeply entrenched in our culture, and that there are genes for schizophrenia, genes for homosexuality, genes for leadership, and so on. These are all dated beliefs built on yesterday's news. First of all, there's no gene for dyslexia or ADD or alcoholism, for example. So not every health condition or physical variation is associated with the gene. And fewer than 5% of people on the planet are born with some genetic condition, like type 1 diabetes, Down syndrome, or sickle cell anemia. The other 95% of us who develop such a condition acquire it through lifestyle and behaviors. So again, most of these diseases and health conditions like dyslexia, ADD, alcoholism, on and on and on, those are products of a sick, toxic environment. Those are products of medical interventions. Those are products of living in non-conducive ways to our biological system. And they blame it on genes because they don't want you to look at the source of these things. Again, they want you to feel powerless and think that you can't do anything about these things. And we totally can by not giving power, not giving our attention, not playing these games, not participating in the things that keep us enslaved and sick and diseased. Okay, so fewer than 5% of people on the planet are born with some genetic condition like type 1 diabetes, Down syndrome, or sickle cell anemia, which I propose is due to toxicity from generation to generation. Those are not natural conditions. Those are brought on by bad environments and chemicals and everything else, man-made bullshit. The other 95% of us who develop such a condition acquire through lifestyle and behaviors. The flip side is also true. Not everyone born with the genes associated with the condition, say Alzheimer's or breast cancer, ends up getting that. So not just because your mom had Alzheimer's or breast cancer doesn't mean you're going to get it. Just because the gene goes in the family doesn't mean it's completely determined by your lifestyle and your behaviors and your thought processes and how you live. It has nothing to, everybody has these genes. Everybody. It's just whether they're turned on or they're turned off. It's not as though our genes are eggs that will ultimately hatch someday. That's just not the way it works. The real questions are whether or not any gene we might be carrying has been expressed yet, and what we're doing that might signal that gene to turn either on or off. Very simple. But people would rather feel like a victim and participate and indulge in these things. And then when they get cancer, when they get these other issues, they want to just go, oh, there's nothing I can do. Woe is me. Look at me. And and we have a nation full of people that live like that. A huge shift in the way we look at genes came when scientists finally mapped the human genome. In 1990, at the beginning of the project, the researchers expected they'd eventually discover that we have 140,000 different genes. They came up with that number because genes manufacture and supervise the production of proteins, and the human body manufactures 100,000 different proteins, plus 40,000 regulatory proteins needed to make other proteins. So the scientists mapping the human genome were anticipating that they find one gene per protein. But by the end of the project in 2003, they were shocked to discover that, in fact, humans have only 23,688 genes. From the perspective of Watson's central dogma, that's not only not enough genes to create our complex bodies and keep them running, but also not even enough genes to keep the brain functioning. So if it's not contained in the genes, where does all the information come from that's required to create so many proteins and sustain life? The genius of your genes. The answer to that question led to a new idea. Genes must work together in systemic cooperation with one another so that many are expressed, turned on, or suppressed, turned off at the same time within the cell. It's the combination of the genes that are turned on at any one time that produces all the different proteins we depend on for life. Picture a string of blinking Christmas tree lights with some flashing on together while others flash off. Or imagine a city skyline at night, with the lights in the individual rooms in each building flipping on or off as the night progresses. This doesn't happen randomly, of course. The entire genome or DNA strand knows what every other part is doing in an interconnected fashion that's intimately choreographed. Every atom, molecule, cell, tissue, and system of the body functions at a level of energetic coherence equal to the intentional or unintentional, conscious or unconscious state of being of the individual personality. So it makes sense that genes can be activated, turned on, or deactivated, turned off by the environment outside the cell, which sometimes means the environment inside the body, the emotional, biological, neurological, mental, energetic, and even spiritual states of being, and at other times means the environment outside the body, trauma, temperature, altitude, toxins, bacteria, viruses, food, alcohol, and so on. So all of these things affect your genes, guys. It's not like you're just born with whatever's going to happen to you is going to happen. It's your conscious choices and decisions, what you're taking in to your body, whether it be through your mouth, ears, nose, eyes, skin, and what you're putting on your body and in your mind. Those are the things that determine what the fuck's going to happen to you. Genes are, in fact, classified by the type of stimulus that turns them on and off. For example, experience-dependent or activity-dependent genes are activated when we're having novel experiences, learning new information, and healing. These genes generate protein synthesis and chemical messengers to instruct stem cells to morph into whatever types of cells are needed at the time for healing. Behavioral state dependent genes are activated during periods of high emotional arousal, stress, or different levels of awareness, including dreaming. They provide a link between our thoughts and our bodies. That is, they're the mind-body connection. These genes offer an understanding of how we can influence our health in states of mind and body that promote well-being, physical resilience, and healing. Scientists now believe it's even possible that our genetic expression fluctuates on a moment-to-moment basis. The research is revealing that our thoughts and feelings, as well as our activities, that is, our choices, behaviors, and experiences, have profound healing and regenerative effects on our bodies, as the men in the monastery study discovered. Thus, your genes are being affected by your interactions with your family, friends, coworkers, and spiritual practices, as well as your sexual habits, your exercise levels, and the types of detergents you use. You are literally creating yourself daily. Daily, you are creating your future by what you're surrounding yourself, the activities you participate in, the things you're putting in and on your body, in and in your eyes, in your ears, in your mind. Those are all determining. We are determining every day. This is a day-to-day basis, guys. The latest research shows that approximately 90% of genes are engaged in cooperation with signals from the environment. So 90% of your genes, of your deterministic genes, of what is going to transpire with your body, are being determined, are in cooperation with your environment. So if your environment's sick and toxic, guess what? You're going to be sick and toxic. And if our experience is what activates a good number of our genes, then our nature is influenced by nurturing. So why not harness the power of these ideas that we can do everything possible to maximize our health and minimize our dependence on the prescription pad? Because people are addicted to the easy answer and the pill. As Ernest Rossi, PhD, writes in The Psychobiology of Gene Expression, our subjective states of mind, consciously motivated behavior, and our perception of free will can modulate gene expression to optimize health. Individuals can alter their genes during a signal generation according to the latest scientific thinking. While the process of genetic evolution can take thousands of years, a gene can successfully alter its expression through a behavior change or a novel experience within minutes, and then it may be passed on to the next generation. Again, they got to throw in that genetic evolution bullshit in there. That's all horseshit. We are able to evolve immediately. Our bodies are so amazingly biologically functioning. It's unreal. We have no clue. The thing that keeps our bodies from doing what it needs to do is our minds. Our minds control the body. Our minds are controlling our thoughts and emotions, and therefore we've encaged our mind through the propaganda, and therefore everything else is caged. And this unlimited potential that we were born with, that is our birthright, was stolen from us. We still have it. We can reclaim it, but most people won't. Most people are in complete denial. They'd rather live in the comfortability of slavery than the unknown abyss of a free man. It helps to think of our genes less like stone tablets onto which our fate has been ceremoniously carved, and more like storehouses of an enormous amount of coded information, or even massive libraries of possibilities for the expression of proteins. But we can't just call the stored information up to make use of it the way a company might order something from its warehouse. It's as if we don't know what's in storage or how to access it, so we end up using a small portion of what's truly available. In fact, we actually express only about 1.5% of our DNA, while the other 98.5% lies dormant in the body. Scientists called it junk DNA, but it's not really junk. They just don't know how all of that material is used yet, although they do know that at least some of it is responsible for making regulatory proteins. Now that blows my mind, because 1.5%, we're only using 1.5% of our DNA. They can't even figure out what the other 98.5% is for. And my theory is that that is our unlimited potential that is not being used, because we've been put in these boxes on purpose and enslaved in our minds. we are unable to activate those other genes and use them because we are limiting ourselves on purpose. In reality, genes contribute to our characteristics but do not determine them. The tools of our consciousness, including our beliefs, prayers, thoughts, intentions, and faith, often correlate much more strongly with our health, longevity, and happiness than our genes do. The fact is, just as there's more to our bodies than a sack of bones and flesh, there's more to our genes than just stored information. I think I'll stop that there. Should I keep going? I'll go one more. The biology of gene expression. Now let's take a closer look at how genes are switched on. Several different factors can be responsible, actually, but for the sake of our discussion here about the mind-body connection, we'll keep it simple. Once a chemical messenger, for example, a neuropeptide from outside of the cell, from the environment, locks into the cell's docking station and passes through the cell membrane, it travels to the nucleus where it encounters the DNA. The chemical messenger modifies or creates a new protein, and then the signal it was carrying is translated to information now inside the cell. Then it enters the nucleus of the cell through a small window, and depending on the content of the protein message, it looks for a specific chromosome, a single piece of coiled DNA that contains many genes within the nucleus, just as you might look for a specific book on the shelf in the library. Each of these strands is covered in a protein sleeve that acts as a filter between the information contained in the DNA strand and the rest of the intracellular environment of the nucleus. In order for the DNA code to be selected, the sleeve must be removed or unwrapped so that the DNA can be exposed. Just as the book chosen from a library shelf then has to be opened before anybody can read it. The genetic code of DNA contains information waiting to be read and activated to create a particular protein. Until that information is exposed in the gene by unwrapping that protein sleeve, the DNA is latent. It's a potential storehouse of encoded information just waiting to be unlocked or opened. You could think of the DNA as a parts list of potentials that are awaiting instructions to construct proteins which regulate and maintain every aspect of life. And that's what I'm saying. That's behind my theory, is that this stuff is laying dormant because it can't be activated because we are holding ourselves back in our mind. It's just literally our DNA is sitting there waiting for the instructions, but our mind is incapable at the moment because we have it locked inside of a box. Once the protein selects the chromosome, it opens it up by removing the outer covering around the DNA. Another protein then regulates and readies an entire gene sequence within the chromosome. Think of it as a chapter within a book, to be read all the way from the start of the sequence to its end. Once the gene is exposed and the protein sleeve is removed and read, another nucleic acid called ribonucleic acid, RNA, is produced from the regulatory protein reading the gene. Now the gene is expressed or activated. The RNA exits the nucleus of the cell to be assembled into a new protein from the code the RNA carries. It has gone from being a blueprint of latent potential to being active expression. The protein the gene creates can now construct, assemble, interact with, restore, maintain, and influence many different aspects of life, both within the cell and outside of it. Just as an architect gets all of the information that's necessary to build a structure from a blueprint, the body gets all the instructions it needs to create complex molecules that keep us alive and operating from the chromosomes of our DNA. But before the architect reads the blueprint, it has to be pulled out of its cardboard tube and unrolled. Until then, it's just latent information waiting to be read. The cell is the same way. The gene is inert until its protein sheathing is removed and the cell chooses to read the gene sequence. Oh, yeah. I mean, this is just wild. Scientists used to believe all the body needed was the information itself, the blueprint, to start construction. So that's what most of them focused on. They paid little attention to the fact that the whole cascade of events starts with the signal outside of the cell, which is, in fact, responsible for what genes within its library the cell chooses to read. That signal, as we now know, includes thoughts, choices, behaviors, experiences, and feelings. So it makes sense that if you can change these elements, you can also determine your genetic expression. Exactly. They've got us locked in. Our thoughts, they've got our thoughts. They've programmed our thoughts. They have our thoughts enslaved, because then if you keep on participating, guys, in listening to all the propaganda, the distractions, the entertainment, it's all programming. It's all to keep you in that box. It's all to keep you locked down. It's all to keep you from recognizing your true potential. And it's all on purpose, and it's all to keep us enslaved. And because without us, there would be no them. There would be no controllers. There would be no authorities. There would be none of this abusive systems of governance and hierarchies, social hierarchies and cultural biases and all this horse shit. None of it would exist. It's all a construct. It's all a lie. It's all an illusion. It's all manipulation. It's all a skewing of the truth. We have been hijacked.